Hi everyone, welcome to Great Glen Yoga. My name's Rachel and today I'm going to take you through a yin yoga practice for the spine. So back problems are a really common complaint. I think at some point in our lives we'll all have little twinges and issues with our backs. So having a practice within your yin yoga program that focuses particularly around the spine can be really helpful as a preventative method for making sure that we're taking a little bit of time to look after the back, look after the spine, so that when we're doing all of our other activity, perhaps the spine then will be that little bit more resilient and that little bit more robust to take on some of that additional activity. So in this particular practice, we're going to be nurturing all of the fascia all the way down the spine and inevitably kind of in parts of the bodies that are linked into the spine as well. So as ever, make sure that you're comfortable, that you've kind of got clothing on that aids movement, have some props handy if you decide you want to use them. There's certainly a couple of poses where I would recommend using a prop. So if you've got blocks, bolster, cushions, whatever, have them to hand. One kind of word of caution for this practice is if you've got any kind of existing back issue, if you're kind of dealing with some issues and niggles at the moment, this probably isn't the greatest idea to go forward with this practice. Have a chat with your doctor beforehand and make sure that it's something that you should be doing. But certainly as a preventative method of ensuring that any future back issues are not there or not so bad, then this is a really great practice to add in to your overall program. So we're going to start off in a kind of variation of Sphinx and or Seal, depending on kind of what your back's feeling like today and how intense you want to take this pose. So we're going to come over onto our bellies, and I'm going to use my bolster for this one. I'm going to come into a variation of Seal. So I'm just going to pop that to one side there. But if you're wanting to come into Sphinx pose, then we're coming down onto our bellies, just easing down in the best way for you. And then if you're going to come into Sphinx pose, we've got our forearms out in front of us, elbows under the shoulders, gaze straight ahead. Your legs can be kind of hip width distance apart. And if it feels a little bit better, you can always widen them out. The wider your legs are, the kind of less intense the feeling will be on the lower back. So you can kind of play around with that, see what feels good for you. And if you want to take it a little bit further and you want to come up into Seal pose, you can just do that without the bolster that I'm going to use. So if you widen out the palms ever so slightly just to sort of the side of the mat, and you can lift into Seal pose, and that just is going to bring that extra layer of intensity into the back. You'll certainly feel that. But if you want that little bit more intensity, but you also want a little bit of support, great idea to just slide the bolster under the rib cage. So have it so that it's kind of top of abdomen, rib cage is lying over it, hands in the Seal position, and then you're just resting onto the bolster there for this pose. And as I say, if that just feels too intense, then don't come up into Seal, stay down in Sphinx pose, and just rest there. So we're slowing down the breathing, just getting ourselves situated in this pose, in the variation that feels best for you and your body today. And again, you can always play around with the legs, widen them, bring them together, see what feels best for your lower back. And remember what I said at the start, this isn't about, if you've already got any back pain, this isn't about making that worse. Yin yoga is all about sensation, not pain. So we're wanting to feel that we're working into the lower back, but certainly not to the level where it's causing any discomfort. A really good rule of thumb is if you're finding it hard to breathe, then you've probably gone a little bit too far. And you can even play around with, doing half of it in seal, and then if it feels like, okay, that's enough, you can come back down into Sphinx for the last little part of this stretch. And if you're in seal pose like I am, and just rest on one hand, slide bolster out from under you, come down, and we're just going to rest lightly, head on the palms just for a second, on the hands. And lifting back up, palms under the shoulders, lifting up into a kneeling position. So we're going to come into child's pose now, and you can choose whichever variation you feel will work best for you today. So I'm just going to come into a closed-legged child's pose, just draping over the legs and letting the hands come down beside me. If you'd like, you could move into a wide-legged pose with the tips of the big toes together and leaning forward that way as well. So whichever feels best for you today. So I'm going to take this closed-legged version. So just starting to drape the tummy over the tops of the legs. Forehead comes to rest on the floor, or if that feels a little too far away, you can grab a block and rest on there as well. Hands come to the sides. And this is a really good counter stretch for our Sphinx seal pose that we've just done. Just stretching into the spine here in a different way. Coming out of this pose, palms come to the floor and just easing back up into our kneeling position. So it's quite a warm day here today. So Scotland's summer is usually mixed at best. We've had a few nice days this week, but today is very humid and that kind of weather where you're just waiting for a storm. So yeah, it's warm, definitely warm. Not used to it. We're really not used to it here. So we're going to come over into a tabletop position now. And the next pose we're going to come into is baby dragon. So we're going to lift this right foot over to the front of the mat and pop it just in between the palms there. And this is a really lovely pose for stretching into the left hip crease, the top of the left thigh. And also because you've got a slight bit of a nice stretch into the spine here as well. So it does a little bit of everything, this pose. I really enjoy it. And in this pose, what can be useful is to just take your blocks and just stretch over to them. And if it just feels like the floor might be a little bit too far away or it's giving you too much of a stretch, you can just place the blocks underneath the palms. And that actually feels really nice today. So I'm going to use those blocks staring straight ahead. And we're working, as I say, into that hip, into the top of the left thigh, working down the spine as well because of the forward lunge motion. So just settle into the version of this that feels good for you and relax. Depending on the surface that you're on as well, you might want to double over your mat. If you've got sensitive knees, that might feel a bit strong on the left knee. So yeah, play around, see what feels good. And you can always come onto the fists as well if it feels as though there's a little extra pressure than you would want on the hands. You can just come into the fists too, onto your block. And to come out of this, just pushing into the hands, taking the hips back, bringing the right foot back to join the left, and we're just going to come back into a kneeling position, just where we started. Just closing the eyes, taking a second just to feel the effects of that stretch before we move on to the second side. Okay, so just opening the eyes, let's move into the second side for our baby dragon. So we're coming forward again. I'm going to use my blocks again, bringing the left foot to the front of the mat, in between the palms, just getting that back leg in the right position as well, making sure you've got that straight out behind you. And again, starting to feel that lovely stretch in the right hip, top of the right thigh. Nice little bit of work here in the lower back as well. Stretching forward, closing down the eyes, and just sinking into this lovely stretch. Lifting out of this pose, pressing into the hands, lifting the hips back and bringing the legs together, back into our kneeling position, just for a second here. And just seeing how that feels now that we've evened those two sides out. And how is that back feeling? How are we feeling in the spine? So we're going to come into caterpillar pose now, and this is probably one of, I think, the best poses for the spine and for the spine completely. So we're not just focusing in with caterpillar pose on one part of the back, one part of the spine. It's giving us that work right the way through the spine, which I think makes it kind of unique in that respect. So just going to ease across onto one side, bring the legs out in front. I'm just going to move my blocks out of the way for this one. I don't think I'll be needing them, but please hang on to them if you think you'd like to use them. Feet out in front of you, legs straight. You probably want to have them kind of hip distance-ish apart. And then we're just going to drape forward across the thighs. And the great thing about coming forward in this type of forward fold in yin yoga is we're really just letting gravity do everything for us. So we're not looking for a straight back. It's absolutely fine for the back to round forward, for the neck to round forward. The fact that we're in this pose for a little while means that that's going to give us the chance to really work into every single part of the spine, and we're protected because we're staying in the fold for a little while and we're letting gravity do all that work for us. So nice and gently just start to move forward and just start to dangle across the thighs. And you might find you don't go very far initially, depending on kind of your general flexibility, but also just how the body's feeling today, how the back's feeling today, how the backs of the legs are, if the hamstrings are tight, anything like that could affect kind of what happens in this pose. But just take these first couple of minutes to just get yourself where you want to be, where feels good for you, and just enjoy the feeling and the sensations that you're going to get in this pose, and you're going to get them right from the tip of your toes all the way up to the top of your neck. That's how much we get out of the caterpillar pose. This is how much of the body it's giving relief and release. So it's absolutely one of the most helpful and nurturing poses we can do. And as we breathe and as we stay in this pose for a couple of minutes, gravity will pull us down, the heaviness of the body will pull us down, and we'll just gently ease further and further into this pose. We'll just gently rise back up, Bringing the palms to the floor if they weren't there already, and just using the palms to slowly ease the rest of the body upright again. And just take a second here to see how that feels as well. Really lovely stretch, really nurturing. And as I say, you should be able to feel that right the way, all the way down the posterior chain, right to the tips of the toes. So we're going to come onto our backs now. So I'm just going to swing around. And we're going to use one of our blocks, so you can use your bolster. Either or is absolutely fine to come into supported bridge. So we'll just ease down onto the mat. Soles of the feet onto the floor. Just take a second to get comfortable on your mat, and then you're going to take your block and you can slide it under the hips, under the sacrum, and that can either be at the lowest height, or if you want a little bit more from this pose, you can bring it up to the second height. And that'll just be a little bit more intense on the back, a little bit more intense on the whole of the spine and on the hips. So just see what feels best to you. And then you've got another couple of choices here. You can keep the feet flat to the mat, or you can take the legs out long in front of you. And again, this is just intensifying that stretch, and that also brings into play the tops of the thighs here as well, and those kind of hip flexor areas. So choose what works best for you. I think I'm going to have the legs out long for this one. Going to keep the arms by my side, but equally you could also raise the arms up above the head as well. So remember, this can be quite intense if you're going up onto the second side, regardless of whether your legs are out in front of you or you've got your feet to the mat. So just be mindful of that. And if it starts to feel a little much, come down onto the lower side. And to come out of this pose, if you had your legs out long, just going to bring the soles of the feet back to the mat, and you can just push into the feet to lift the hips up. And I'm actually going to just take the block down to the lowest height, because we're going to come into waterfall pose, or you can do legs up the wall for this. So if you have a good bit of wall near you, you can do this with the legs up the wall, but I'm just going to do it free standing here. So when you've got your block in the right position, and you probably need it slightly higher up your back than when you were doing supported bridge, take the legs up to the sky. And again, I think this is probably one of the most nurturing poses of all. It's really good in terms of not being kind of weight bearing. It's all about gravity. So it's wonderful for the back, wonderful for the legs. You're really nurturing yourself here. You're really keeping yourself safe in a position like this. So I think it's worth doing this kind of every day if you can. It's really beneficial, and it's just wonderful for, I think, general mental health as well. There's something just really comforting about a pose like this. I definitely find that it's one of those poses where even if I'm having a really bad day and grumpy and irritable or anxious or stressed, I think this really helps. Bring the legs back down. Bring them down from the wall if that's where you were doing this pose. And again, just pressing into the feet, lifting the hips and removing the block. Just pop that to one side. So we're going to finish off with a twist now. So we're going to do a slight variation on a twist. I really enjoy this. I find this wonderful for the back. It can be a little bit more intense than some of our other twists. So if you find that it is a bit intense for your back, then come back and just do kind of an ordinary laying spinal twist, whatever works best for you. So what we're going to do here is just have the legs about hip width distance apart, feet on the floor, and I'm just going to drop the legs over to the right. And then once your knees both are over to the right, you're going to take your right foot and just place that on top of the left knee. Arms can be cactused just by your side. And this really is a wonderful stretch just into a little bit of the side body, into the back, and then down the left hip area as well. As I say, it can feel a little intense sometimes on the back. So if it does feel a bit like that to you, then move into a different type of twist, whatever feels best for your body. And if a twist just is not on the cards for you today, then just a nice reclined butterfly pose would be a good alternative. And just release the left knee with the right foot and bring the legs back up, feet flat on the mat, hip width distance apart in the legs, and we'll come over to the other side. So we're just going to drop both knees over to the left this time. So bringing the knees down, and then once your knees are both down on the ground, taking that left foot over the top of the right knee, and arms cactus by our side again. And it could feel quite different on both sides. I definitely feel a little bit more intensity on this side for me, although it still feels really good. So just be mindful of that. It could feel quite different. Just because one side feels good, the other side you may need to do a variation on. just going to release by releasing the right knee with the left foot, bringing the soles back to the mat, resituating the hips. And we're going to come into our Shavasana now, so you can just let the legs stretch out long, hands come to the side, palms facing up towards the ceiling. And just take a second here to think about that practice, the impact that it's had on our spine. Think about kind of how you can use this practice in the future just to prevent any niggles, any aches and pains in that area. Really hope that's felt really useful, really nourishing for the spinal area. So thank you so much for joining me today. I think it's been a practice that I certainly needed, so I hope it's been useful for you. And I hope to see you back here again on the mat really soon. Thank you.